Garnett was a puzzle that the Cavaliers just could not solve.
I mean, it's all about winning for me, and I think the Cavs is committed to doing that. But at the same time, you know, I've given myself options to this point.
Well, everybody is on pins and needles across the country, particularly those teams who are in the running for LeBron James. You ready to go, LeBron? The answer to the question everybody wants to know. LeBron, what's your decision?
In this fall, man, it's very tough. In this fall, I'm going to take my talents to South Beach and join the Miami Heat. In the 7 years that I've gave to that franchise, to that city, it was everything. I mean, those 20,000 plus fans that came out every night we played, and they seen me grow from an 18-year-old kid to a 25-year-old man. And I never wanted to leave Cleveland.
And we've supported him for 7 years now. And for him to go on there and drag us through the mud for 7 years and stab us in the heart, he deserves everything he gets. I hope he never wins anything in Miami. He is dead to me.
The Heat are once again NBA champions. LeBron James captures that elusive title he so desperately coveted.
I guess you have to go through a lot of nightmares before you finally, you know, accomplish your dream, and that's what's going on individually for myself right now.
Superteam, a term that varies in definition from fan to fan. Many believe that a superteam is based on having a certain amount of star players, typically 3 or more. On the other hand, others believe that a superteam has a roster that fits so seamlessly together that they are bound for a championship. Regardless of what the true definition of a superteam is, most people know when the term was created. You guessed it, LeBron James's Miami Heat team. Today, we will be telling the story of how this Miami Heat team changed the landscape of the NBA forever, and the implications that we are seeing today because of this. But before we get into that, we have to go back to the 2009 NBA season. Entering the 2009-10 season, many believe that this was the season LeBron would finally get the hardware that he deserved, an NBA Finals win. After winning the MVP and taking a poorly constructed Cavs roster all the way to the conference finals, LeBron making a deep playoff run with his team seemed inevitable. As the season went on, this claim seemed like it was coming into fruition before the eyes of NBA fans. The Cavaliers were steamrolling through a majority of the league, which allowed them to take the #1 seed in the East and the best record in the entire NBA. In addition to the best record, LeBron James won the MVP award for his second year in a row, making him just the 9th player to achieve this prestigious feat at the time. It is important to note that during this season the Cavs had quite a few injuries, but these were shadowed by LeBron's ability to play point guard when needed and dominate all aspects of the game. With the King averaging nearly 30 points per game on the season, many believe that he would finally carry Cleveland to the promised land, and when the playoffs rolled around, it's safe to say that tensions were high. Going into the first round of the NBA playoffs, the Cleveland Cavaliers matched up against the Chicago Bulls, an easy enough task for this new face of the league. The Cavs were able to easily brush past this team thanks to a dominant performance by LeBron James and company night in and night out. At this point in time, it seemed like the Cavs had all the momentum in the world. LeBron was living up to his MVP hype, and many believe that there was no one getting in his way. But the second round matchup against the Boston Celtics, well, that was a different story. At the time, the Boston Celtics were one of the most stacked rosters in the entire league, led by Rajon Rondo, Kevin Garnett, Ray Allen, and Paul Pierce. The Celtics didn't have nearly as much regular season success, but this roster was filled with veteran talent that had the potential to beat LeBron James than the Cavs. And well, the C's did just that. Games 1 through 4 looked pretty good for the Cavs. Making a statement in Game 1 and getting a blowout win, this young team looked legit. Entering Game 5, the series was knotted at 2-2, and honestly, it looked like it could go either way. Both teams had blowout wins, but not really to the fault of any player. The game planning from game to game was just elite. Game 5 is where things took a turn for the worse though, being that LeBron James had one of the worst games of his career, shooting a horrible 20% from the field and only scoring 15 points. At this point in time, Cleveland Cavalier fans were engulfed in anger. Did LeBron have what it took to lead this team to a championship? Was this team just too young? Were they bound for failure from the start? Between games 5 and 6, these questions and many more ran through the minds of Cavaliers fans, who witnessed their star collapse right before their eyes. Game 6 was do or die for LeBron James. He had to show that he could lead this team to the finals and add to his young legacy. Game 6 wasn't nearly as bad as Game 5, but with a staggering 9 turnovers, young LeBron and the Cavs were eliminated from the playoffs by the Boston Celtics. And as the King walked through the tunnel, an immense amount of boos showered over him. Was this LeBron's last game as a Cav? Many people overlooked the fact that LeBron was a free agent during the summer of 2010. Sure, he could leave, but why would LeBron leave this young Cavs team that was so dominant in the regular season? LeBron was likely thinking the same thing, but the thoughts of carrying this team on his back and the Cavs fanbase turning on him also weighed on his shoulders. Once LeBron became an eligible free agent, some believed that he would re-sign in Cleveland, but others thought that he would do the unthinkable and join another lucky team. Nearly every team in the league tried to pitch LeBron, but the notable teams in his eyes were the Clippers, Knicks, Cavs, and Nets, and of course, the Miami Heat. LeBron made his free agency signing one of the biggest NBA offseason events that we have ever seen, scheduling a broadcast called The Decision where he would reveal what team he chose to sign with. This event in itself raised over $6 million for charity, and even more for those involved. Tensions were high for many NBA fans. Could LeBron possibly join their team and change the landscape of the entire NBA? Fans held their breath for days, waiting for this broadcast to air. But during this time, some other notable signings occurred. A day before the decision announcement, the Miami Heat made some power moves, signing star players Bosh and Dwyane Wade, both of which had solid connections with LeBron James. After these moves, many believe that the Heat didn't have room for someone like LeBron and his big salary demands. But on the day of the decision, LeBron shocked the world when he announced that he would be taking his talents to South Beach. This decision by LeBron sent the NBA world into an absolute frenzy. Hundreds upon hundreds of videos were posted which consisted of angry Cavs fans burning their jerseys and calling LeBron a sellout. But let's pause right here, because before LeBron James even played a game with the Miami Heat, he changed the NBA forever. Before LeBron went to Miami, the NBA was pretty simple. Players stayed somewhat loyal to their teams they were drafted to and tried to get them a championship. Sure, there are some exceptions to this, and of course, trades happened, but for players at LeBron's caliber, they rarely left their team, especially one that had as much success as the Cavs. Not only that, but many criticized LeBron for making this move at the time that he did. Most NBA stars would have at least signed one more big contract and tried to bring a chip to their team, but LeBron did not care. This shifted the power of NBA players immensely. Now GMs of NBA teams had to cater to their star players' needs and make sure they were happy, or else they would just leave. Fast forwarding to the current NBA we see today, almost all loyalty is gone, out the window, completely. Sure, there are a couple players that have stayed loyal to a bad franchise, but for the most part, if they aren't contending, star players will leave with no hesitation. That is, unless the team mortgages away their entire future to get pieces to win now. Back to LeBron though, because at the time, people thought that this mindset was absolutely crazy. Highly respected people within the NBA such as Michael Jordan and Magic Johnson slandered LeBron James, saying that he was taking the easy way out and was shying away from being the man on a championship team. At this point, aside from the people of Miami, LeBron was viewed as a villain. So, in order to even have a chance at changing his narrative, he and the Heat had to dominate. And they did just that. Or did they? Starting the 2010-2011 season, expectations were exponentially higher for LeBron than they had ever been. Being that LeBron willed a far from perfect Cavaliers team to the best record in the league last year, anything short of the best record of all time would be a disappointment with this stacked Miami Heat team. Starting the season, things did not go according to plan. It was clear that the Heat roster was not gelled at all, and the Big Three was not used to playing with other stars. Because of this, the Miami Heat had a record of 9-8 after their first 17 games, and at this point, the LeBron James hate was at an all-time high. Fans of all teams were slandering LeBron and saying that he was getting what he deserved. After all, no one had ever seen a player do something like this, so at the time, many would say the criticism was not only valid, but necessary to prevent this from happening in the future. The criticism might have been the worst thing for fans to do though, because after this slow start to the season with constant slander, LeBron got angry, and he was playing angry on the court. All of a sudden, things were clicking on all levels for this new Heat team. LeBron began to use the hate as fuel and dropped 38 points on the Cavs, getting booed every time he touched the ball. The Heat went from barely above 500 to the second seed in the East with a record of 58-24, just a few games behind LeBron's record with the Cavs in the previous season. Despite the worst regular season record, the Heat team only got hotter as they transitioned from the regular season to the postseason. This time, LeBron and the Heat matched up against the 76ers, a lower seed that many believe this team would easily sweep. The 76ers were able to steal a game, but it was clear that Miami was the better team, which is shown in the 4-1 score of the series. The conference semifinals are where things took an interesting turn though, because even though LeBron switched teams, the Boston Celtics team that he had lost to in the previous season was still on their side of the bracket, and now LeBron had to face off against them for a second year in a row. Heading into this series, LeBron and the rest of the Heat roster were absolutely locked in. This was the chance for LeBron to embrace his villain role and show that he made the right choice joining the Heat. This was a must-win series for LeBron. If he lost, he would go down as one of the most hated players in NBA history. Players could feel the tension in the air for Game 1, but the Heat did not cool down one bit, taking the first and second games of the series with ease. Game 3, however, was a different story. Boston emerged and showed that they had what it took to win the series. Constant hustle plays and 50-50 balls allowed this team to beat the Heat by 16 points. And at this point, Heat fans were absolutely nervous. Last year when this happened, LeBron James seemingly collapsed. The question was, would he do it again? Game 4 looked like Game 3. The Boston Celtics came out hot and the Heat quickly trailed behind. LeBron stans were having flashback nightmares of last year, but this time, this team was different for LeBron. The Heat seemed to turn it up a notch out of nowhere and slowly chipped away at their deficit. All of a sudden, they were within 10, then 5, then they took the lead and won the game. Celtics fans were utterly stunned. They blew a huge Game 4 that would have tied the series, and the Heat looked like they had all the momentum in the series at this point. This proved to be true in Game 5, being that the Heat won the game easily, and after winning the series 4-1, LeBron crouched down on the court. He proved the haters wrong. He was the man in the series and beat the Celtics. After this emotional moment, LeBron and the Heat prepared for the next series because the job was not finished. Now, they had to take on the Chicago Bulls. The Bulls were no team to be messed with, and heading into the series, many fans smelled an upset on the way. Game 1 was an absolute catastrophe for the Heat, getting blown out by over 20 points. All the LeBron hate came back as quickly as it had left. He doesn't have what it takes to win. He's a snake, and the usual comments filled the arena as the Heat looked to bounce back. Once again, LeBron and the rest of the Miami Heat team used this hate to fuel the fire, and they proceeded to win the next 3 games. All they had to do at this point was win one more game, and they would advance to the NBA Finals. Game 5 looked an awful lot like LeBron's nightmare games in the past. The Heat as a whole struggled, and with 3 minutes left, they were down 65-77. The Bulls were not going to go down easily, and many believed that this series would go to 6 or 7. But then, the unthinkable happened. Just like we had seen in the past, the Miami Heat turned it up a notch and took over the game, going on an insane 18-3 run to win the game by 3 points. Dwyane Wade showed his stardom, hitting a clutch 4-point play, and LeBron finished it off with his spot-on free throw shooting. After huge games against the Celtics and Bulls, the Miami Heat were clearly championship favorites, and after matching up against the Dallas Mavericks, this new super team won their first NBA Finals. At least, that's what everyone assumed would happen. Game 1 against the Mavericks was an easy win for the Heat, which led many to conclude that they would likely be crowned champions in 4 games. This mindset carried over to the second game, being that the Miami Heat looked as dominant as ever, and by the middle of the 4th quarter, the team was up by 15 points. But then, the tragedy happened. Suddenly, the tables turned, and the Mavericks dominated on both sides of the ball, making tough shots and clamping up Miami's big 3. The Mavericks scored almost 20 unanswered points, and at this point in time, the Heat team was stunned. They let their guard down when it mattered most, and unlike their comeback against the Bulls, this time they were on the other end of the pendulum. From here on out, the series was very tight, and the Mavericks resurged as a contending team that many thought they were capable of. Game 3 was back and forth all game, but Miami was able to steal it thanks to a game-winning layup by Bosh. This is where things took a turn for the worse though, because the Miami Heat would proceed to lose the rest of their games, and the Dallas Mavericks would be crowned NBA champions. LeBron James was devastated. The series could have gone in a completely different direction if he just didn't let his guard down in Game 2. In addition to that, the LeBron James hate was at an all-time high, being that he averaged a mere 17 points per game in the finals, which at the time was the biggest drop-off in scoring compared to the regular season in the entire history of the NBA. At this point, one thing was clear. LeBron had to step up and prove the haters wrong, or else he would be shunned for the rest of his career. On the bright side, the other 2 Miami stars shined in the finals. Dwyane Wade averaged nearly 27 points per game and showed that he was one of the best players in the entire NBA. So all this group had to do is regroup and head into the season with a chip on their shoulder. What many people don't talk about is the fact that LeBron James almost left the NBA entirely. The following season was delayed due to the NBA lockouts, and LeBron James actually received offers from the Seattle Seahawks and Dallas Cowboys to play professional football. This would have been the somewhat easy way out because all the hate that LeBron was getting in the NBA, and LeBron himself said that he heavily considered doing this, especially after his brutal finals performance. However, for whatever reason, LeBron decided to stick with basketball, and it is safe to say that this was the right choice because from that moment on, things were only uphill for LeBron and the Heat. LeBron began to shy away from his villain role and take pride and joy in basketball once again. He worked with NBA legends such as Hakeem Olajuwon to improve the weak aspects of his game, and he was determined to be the best player in the NBA this season. And well, the King did just that. During the lockout season, the Heat went on to have a record of 46-20, which in a normal year would have been a record of 57-25, pretty much the same as last year. However, even though this team had a similar record, they looked to be much more improved and locked in. LeBron James polished the weak areas of his game as mentioned, and this team's chemistry was at an all-time high with head coach Eric Spoelstra working his magic. By the end of the year, the Miami Heat secured the 1 seed and were ready to head back to the finals once again with MVP LeBron James playing at another level. The playoffs this time were much easier for the Heat, being that LeBron James didn't take the scoring dip like he usually did. His scoring actually increased this year. When Bosh went down with an injury against the Pacers, LeBron took over and had a 40-point masterpiece, willing the Heat to the NBA Finals. The Miami Heat plowed through New York and were once again faced off against the Boston Celtics, who just wouldn't go away. This series went to 7 games, but the Heat's new small ball lineup due to the absence of Bosh was just too much for the C's to handle. At this point, Miami was playing their best basketball yet, but many believe that this team's biggest challenge was ahead of them, being that they faced off against the OKC Thunder in the NBA Finals. The Thunder were a young team, but they shouldn't have been taken lightly. Russell Westbrook and Kevin Durant had shown that they were both 2 of the best players in the entire NBA despite their lack of experience. And with a plethora of role players such as James Harden and Serge Ibaka, many believed that this series would be a close one. But the Miami Heat played no games in this matchup. The Heat nearly swept the Thunder, winning their first NBA Finals with LeBron with a final score of 4-1. LeBron had finally done it. He was able to win it all and be the man on a team due to the fact that he was also awarded with the Finals MVP. At this point, many NBA teams were terrified of this Miami Heat team. They just destroyed one of the best teams talent-wise in the Thunder, and they didn't look like they'd be slowing down anytime soon. LeBron finally got his first ring, and it was very apparent that he was hungry for more, being that he wanted to become the best basketball player of all time. The 2012-13 season was pretty much a repeat of the year before. LeBron won his second MVP in a row, and the Miami Heat were dominant as well, going on the longest winning streak in NBA history, winning 27 games in a row. By the end of the season, Miami totaled up an elite record of 66-16, which was the best record in franchise history. At this point, all signs indicated that this team would be back holding the trophy at the end of the playoffs, and this time, things went according to plan for LeBron and Miami. The Heat were able to take down the Bucks and Bulls very easily. They met the Pacers once again in the conference finals. That took 7 games to complete, but once again, the Miami Heat came out on top. Going into the NBA Finals for a 3rd year in a row, the Miami Heat team was matched up against debatably their biggest challenge yet, the San Antonio Spurs. The Spurs had an immense amount of young and veteran talent this year that was clearly legit, so this would be no walk in the park, unlike their Thunder matchup last year. The Miami Heat came into this series looking out of sorts. Role players have been struggling since the Indiana series, which made the team rely on LeBron very heavily. But now, LeBron was being a lot more passive, which led to an overall struggle for the team. The first 5 games were pretty bad for the Heat, and in Game 6, they faced elimination, being down 2-3 in the series. Despite the odds being stacked against them, LeBron went off in Game 6, dropping a triple-double and willing this team to a Game 7. Game 7 was where legends were made. Heat fans crowded in the arena, filled with nervous excitement as their team had just come off a huge Game 6 win. At that moment, it was clear that nothing else mattered aside from how LeBron James performed. He could either keep his momentum or slow down and choke like we had seen in the past. After tip-off, the game was back and forth for a bit, but then LeBron took over. Tough bucket after tough bucket dropped in for the King, and he ended the game with 37 points, the highest point total by a player in NBA Finals history. The Heat stole away Game 7 and officially made their comeback dreams a reality. They really did it. Back-to-back champs and back-to-back Finals MVP for LeBron James. At this point in time, LeBron was undeniably the best player in the NBA, and people were even starting to talk about LeBron being the next best player of all time. Many believed that the Heat dynasty was bound to be dominant for the next few years. After all, aside from Bosh, this Heat team had stayed pretty healthy and showed that they could still win when injuries occurred, so who says they can't three-peat and possibly even win more championships? Little did people know, the following 2013-14 season would be LeBron's last year in Miami, but not for the reasons you think. Starting the season, the Heat weren't bad, but injuries plagued this team, which led to a lack of chemistry. Throughout the season, the Miami Heat used over 20 starting lineup, and aside from LeBron James and a handful of selected other players, the Heat were constantly having people in and out of the rotation due to injuries. Despite this, the Miami Heat still had a solid season. No MVP for LeBron, but he still averaged terrific numbers, racking up over 27 points per game on solid shooting splits. Many believe that if healthy, the Heat could still three-peat, and once they entered the playoffs, this looked to hold true. The Heat were able to fend off the Bobcats, Nets, and Pacers, none of which were even close to beating the Heat team. This put the Heat back in the finals against their new rivals that they beat last year, the San Antonio Spurs. The Spurs were looking even better than last year, with Tony Parker and Tim Duncan dominating, along with great cast members such as Kawhi Leonard and Manu Ginobili, playing debatably just as good. Many believe that this series could go either way, but regardless, it was clear that NBA fans were in for a treat. Unlike the previous season, LeBron wasn't able to take over the series and had a lot of issues with cramps. There were some rumors that the Spurs intentionally made their arena hot because they knew about these issues with LeBron, but there has been no proof that this was intentional. With LeBron struggling, it was clear that the Heat did not have the firepower to win without him, which was a bit concerning for LeBron. The Spurs were able to win this series in 5 games, and simply outplayed the Miami Heat, who showed a lack of fight against this team compared to last year. Just like that, this franchise's hope of 3 championships in a row was gone, and LeBron was once again a free agent. Many believed that he would return to Miami based on their success rate, but due to the injury-prone stars and other factors, LeBron decided to return to Cleveland and join young star in the making Kyrie Irving. As soon as he arrived, LeBron was gone, and although the Miami Heat dynasty only lasted for 4 years, it changed the NBA forever. Now, when stars aren't happy or aren't winning, they simply leave their team. First, it was leaving in free agency, but now in the modern-day NBA, players will demand a trade if they have any feeling of wanting to leave. The power dynamic between front office members and players has shifted dramatically. Now, if franchises don't want to lose their star, they will have to trade away their whole future for win-now pieces. And chances are, that will only delay the inevitable of their star leaving. We are seeing this with LeBron James and the LA Lakers at this very moment. The team gave LeBron too much power and traded away all their assets for an injury-prone star in Anthony Davis and a washed Russell Westbrook. Plain and simple, teams can't slowly build winning cultures and rosters without losing their stars now. And the Miami Heat were the start of the player-first league that allowed anyone to leave their team at any time. If you enjoyed, be sure to subscribe and leave a like. But other than that, thank you all so much for watching. I'll catch you on the next one. Woods out.